April 7th, 2026. Stage 2 of the Vuelta al Pais Vasco, 164 kilometers of racing already in the legs, 68 left to go. And a 19-year-old nobody had heard of 18 months ago decides he is bored. He attacks. Not a probe, not a test. A full, violent, irreversible acceleration on the slopes of San Miguel de Aralar. 9.5 kilometers of climb, averaging almost 8% gradient. The entire elite of professional cycling sitting right behind him. Primož Roglič is on his wheel. A man who has won 3 consecutive Vueltas a España. A man who has spent 15 years building the engine inside his body for exactly this kind of moment. He lasts less than a minute before he cracks. One by one, every name that defines modern cycling gets dropped like they are standing still. Paul Seixas crosses the summit alone. 1 minute and 25 seconds clear. And then he does it 2 more times over the next 4 days. He wins the overall classification. The mountains, the points. The best young rider. He takes everything at 19 years old, in only his 2nd full season as a professional, and becomes the youngest winner in the history of one of cycling's most prestigious stage races. The French sports paper L'Équipe dedicates its entire front page to him. Not a column. The whole front page, on a night when the Champions League was being played and Mbappe's team had just lost to Bayern Munich. They pushed the biggest name in world football off the cover for a teenage cyclist. And that tells you more about the weight of this moment than any statistic could. France has not had a Tour de France winner since Bernard Hinault crossed the finish line in 1985. 41 years. A full generation of talented riders who came close, who were supposed to be the answer, and who never got there. And now, for the first time in 4 decades, people are asking the question out loud, is this the one? But that is not the question we are here to answer today. There is a far more interesting one underneath all the headlines. What is physically happening inside Paul Seixas' body? What makes him different at a biological level? And why do the real numbers suggest that what we are watching might be something the sport sees once in a generation? Here's the fact that should stop you in your tracks. Paul Seixas is 186 centimeters tall, 6'1", 14 centimeters taller than Marco Pantani, the greatest pure climber in the history of cycling. 13 taller than Nairo Quintana, 10 taller than Contador. And when you understand how climbing on a bicycle actually works, that height should make everything we just described completely impossible. The single enemy of every cyclist on a mountain is gravity. Gravity does not care how hard you trained. It only cares about one number. How much power can you produce for every kilogram of body weight you have to drag up that hill? That is watts per kilogram. And it is the number that separates the best climbers in the world from everyone else. Pantani raced at 57 kilograms, Quintana at 59, Bernal at 60. These are not underweight athletes. They are optimized. Because on an 8% slope, every single extra kilogram costs you watts you cannot afford. So how does a 186 centimeter man beat all of them? Seixas weighs 64 kilograms. At that height, that requires a body fat percentage somewhere between 4 and 8%. That is not a number most athletes ever see. It means his body is essentially a very tall, very lean aerobic machine with almost nothing wasted. And here is the physics that makes this work. On a steep climb above 7% gradient, where speeds drop below 18 kilometers per hour, aerodynamic drag becomes almost irrelevant. The air resistance that punishes taller riders on flat roads essentially disappears. What is left is pure watts per kilogram. And on that playing field, Seixas is competitive with riders who weigh 12 kilograms less than him. But even that does not fully explain the performances we are seeing. To truly understand Paul Seixas, you need to travel back 30 years. To a man who had absolutely no business dominating the Tour de France. And then did it 5 consecutive times. Miguel Indurain, 188 centimeters, 80 kilograms, built for flat roads and time trials. And yet between 1991 and 1995, nobody could touch him. Sports scientists were genuinely puzzled. His watts per kilogram in the mountains should have put him a full minute behind the pure climbers attacking him. And yet he matched them year after year. What they eventually discovered was that Indurain was not just an optimized athlete. He was physiologically extraordinary. His resting heart rate was 28 beats per minute. The average fit adult sits around 65. His lung capacity was 7.8 liters, 50% more than a normal adult male. And his cardiac output at maximum effort was estimated at around 50 liters per minute. A well-trained amateur manages about 25. Indurain's body could deliver oxygen to his muscles at a rate so far above normal that his height and mass simply stopped being a disadvantage. The question sports scientists are now asking is whether the same thing is happening inside Paul Seixas. The number that defines the ceiling of human aerobic performance is called VO2 max. Think of it as the size of your engine. A solid recreational cyclist might score around 60. A domestic professional, 70 to 75. The very best Grand Tour riders in history, somewhere in the high 80s. Chris Froome was tested in a certified laboratory at 84 to 88. Indurain at his peak is estimated around the same. And Pogacar, currently the best cyclist on the planet, has been modeled from his tour performances at somewhere between 91 and 96. Seixas' team has not released any lab data. They guard it the way Formula One teams guard engine specifications. But we can work backwards from what happened on the road. At the Tour de l'Avenir, whose past winners include Le Monde, Indurain, Bernal, and Pogacar, Seixas produced a power output on an uphill time trial that implies a maximal aerobic power well above 7.5 watts per kilogram. At the Strade Bianche, he finished second, beaten only by Pogacar. And on San Miguel de Aralar, independent analysts place his peak mid-climb effort at nearly 7 watts per kilogram, having already raced over 130 kilometers that day. Feed those numbers into the physiological models sports scientists use to estimate aerobic capacity, and the result is alarming. His estimated VO2 max range sits somewhere between 88 and 100. The highest ever reliably recorded in any human athlete in any sport was 96.7, measured in an 18-year-old Norwegian cyclist. The lab sent the equipment back to the manufacturer to be recalibrated before publishing, because they assumed the machine was broken. If Seixas is anywhere near where the models suggest, he is in that territory. And here is the most unsettling part. He has not peaked yet. Research consistently shows that VO2 max in elite endurance athletes does not reach its ceiling until the early to mid-20s. Paul Seixas is 19. The engine may still be growing. Now let us talk about what actually happened inside his body during that attack, because this is where the real story of that moment lives. When Seixas accelerated off the front of the group, the first energy system that fired was his phosphocreatine system, the explosive, immediately available fuel stored directly inside his muscle cells. That gave him the initial burst, but it depletes in under 30 seconds. What sustained him for the next 20-plus minutes was something far more interesting. Every rider behind him was also producing enormous power. The difference was not who could generate force. The difference was what was happening to the metabolic waste products of that force. When you push above the second lactate threshold, the intensity where lactic acid accumulates faster than your body can clear it, a countdown starts inside your muscles. In average well-trained cyclists, this threshold sits at around 70 to 80% of their maximum capacity. In elite professionals, closer to 90. Every rider on that road was somewhere in that range. The problem for Roglic and Skelmos was that Seixas set the pace above their threshold while staying near or just below his own. Their muscles acidified. Their legs started misfiring. Their perceived effort went through the roof. And he just held steady. because his body's ability to manage that metabolic stress was operating at a level beyond theirs. Part of that capacity was built somewhere nobody expected. Not in a Grand Tour. In the mud. Before Paul Seixas was a road racer, he was a cyclocross racer. From his earliest junior years, he spent his winters on short, brutal courses in rain and soft ground. A cyclocross race lasts 45 to 60 minutes, but the intensity never settles. It spikes above the lactate threshold on every short climb and technical section, drops back briefly, then spikes again, over and over, for an hour straight. The adaptation that produces is specific and powerful. It trains the body to recover rapidly between repeated explosive efforts, to tolerate repeated spikes in blood lactate without losing coordination, and to stay technically precise under extreme fatigue. Those are exactly the qualities that allow a rider to launch a violent attack on a mountain and sustain it for 20 minutes. While his future rivals were doing long base miles on smooth roads, Seixas was building that capacity in the mud, every winter, year after year. Now let us put the comparison that everyone is making into actual context. Pogacar at 19 was already extraordinary. But his first World Tour overall victory came at 20. His first Grand Tour podium came at 20, turning 21. Paul Seixas at 19 has already won a UCI World Tour stage race overall, a 6-day race against the full assembled elite, including multiple past Grand Tour winners. No 19-year-old had done that in the entire history of the World Tour calendar. And then there is the Tour de l'Avenir. That race carries a list of former winners that reads like the Sports Hall of Fame. Fignon, Le Monde, Indurain, Bernal, Pogacar. Between those 5 riders alone, they have won 18 Tour de France. The conversion rate from Tour de l'Avenir winner to Grand Tour champion is the strongest single predictor of future greatness that cycling has ever produced. Seixas won the 2025 edition at 18 years old. I want to be direct with you, because the science is what matters, and the hype is easy to manufacture. Not every prodigious talent survives the journey. Injuries happen. The pressure of being 19 and carrying an entire nation's 41-year Tour de France drought is not a small thing. But the physiology? The body that produced those climbs in April? That is not a lucky day. That is not tactics covering for physical limitations. The numbers point to something the sport sees maybe once a decade. And this is where I want to hear from you. Do you think Seixas is the real heir to Pogacar? Or is the hype blinding us to how long and brutal that road actually is? Drop your answer in the comments, because I genuinely do not think there is an obvious answer here, and the best arguments always come from this community. By the way, if you want to understand the other side of what makes a modern Grand Tour rider untouchable, my next video breaks down Pogacar's actual secret weapon. And no, it is not doping. It is something far more interesting. The 120 grams per hour carbohydrate revolution that is rewriting the rules of endurance sport. A story that starts with Olympic marathoners being fueled on rat poison and brandy in 1904. You are going to want to see that one. I am Sebastian. This is the Injury Breakdown, and I will see you there.